Okay, so first let me introduce myself. My name is Sylvie Jason. I am the International Projects Coordinator at Carleton. I coordinate various mobility programs for both students and faculty, as well as larger funding programs such as the FCRF. This funding opportunity is offered to the FCRF member universities, of which there are 20 currently, I believe. Carleton has been a member since 2004, and we have had about 15 recipients of the award since then. This is a very competitive program with a rigorous review, so it is important to know the requirements well, to meet them, and to know what makes a strong application. And so this is the purpose of this session. And I've invited two speakers, Clotilde Ribaud, who is the administrator of the France-Canada Innovation Platform. She is based at the University of Ottawa. And Xavier Grosmaître, who is the Science and Higher Education Attaché at the Embassy of France. Xavier will present on the embassy and the programs available to researchers to connect with France, while Clotilde will be speaking more specifically about the FCRF opportunity in depth and detail. We will have a Q&A afterwards. Please come up with questions, and we hope to have a good engagement, a nice back and forth. You can keep your video on if you want throughout the session, or turn it off and come back on afterwards. So I will now turn to the presenters. I believe we're starting with Xavier. And Xavier, the floor is yours.
Okay. Good morning, everyone. Bonjour à tous. Thank you for inviting me to present a few activities of the French Embassy. I will briefly talk about the French-Canadian Research Fund, and then Clotilde will go more in depth into the program itself. But first, I want to share my screen and show you a few exactly what we are doing at the French Embassy and how we support researchers from France and Canada to connect. So I just have a few slides just to explain to you what is exactly the role of our service at the French Embassy. So we have different missions which are to monitor the advances of science and technology in Canada. And so that's more to inform our country of what are the different major topics of research here in Canada. But our main mission, I would say, is to build relationships between researchers and universities and I would say innovation structures from Canada and France, and to really build bridges. So that's why I call establish or strengthen partnerships in science and technology. And we promote the exchanges of students, of researchers, and young entrepreneurs. And for that, we have different ways to engage in these different missions. For instance, when we want to establish connections and partnerships, what we can do is to organize and support exploratory missions. And one of you, Yvan, was in France this year or last year, Yvan, I don't remember. I guess it was before the pandemic. And we supported his visits of different universities in France. We also organize bilateral workshops and symposia. We either organize it or support it. And the idea is really to promote French expertise and to start to build contacts between new Canadian researchers and French researchers. I will give you two examples. We organized with the Royal Society and the University of Ottawa a large symposium in 2019 about science, trust, and democracy in the digital age. And this was over 2 days, and we invited some researchers from France and also the president of CNRS and other organizations so that they would talk about how is science organized in France and how what is the relationship between researchers and society. That was a big event, but we also support smaller events. For example, in 2019, we invited the ambassador for the oceans to talk about these type of topics and how France works on these subjects. I will give you another example. This year, on October 27th, we'll have a panel discussion between French, Canadian, and German scientists on the impact of climate change on biodiversity in the ocean. That will take place virtually, obviously, for now. And that will be a discussion between a French, a Canadian, and a German researcher about this subject and what kind of impact COP26 will have on their topic of research. And that will be virtually, but we hope to have more of these kind of events next year, either here at the embassy or within universities. And for these type of events, we bring financial support, and we also bring some impact, I would say, connections to French researchers, so that they would be the best researcher for the topic of the discussion. So if you plan to organize a workshop and you want to invite some of your French colleagues, you can reach out to us and we can discuss how we can support it financially. We also promote exchanges of students, researchers, and entrepreneurs. And for that, we have a partnership with MyTax. So there is a specific, I'm sure that you're all aware of who MyTax is. So there's MyTax Embassy partnerships, and then we contribute to welcoming here students from France for GRI programs. And we also part of a GRA program, so that there would be young researchers which would go to France or vice versa. So that's for PhD students and master students. We also have our own mobility program. That's the Moorstrekland program. So this program was started in 2018, and it's the name is for Gérard Mourou and Donna Strickland, which are the 2018 Physics Nobel Prize. But it's open to all type of topics. So this program, it consists on a very basic program, which is we offer a plane ticket and a few per diems, so that researchers can travel to France, Canadian researchers or French researchers can travel to Canada, so that they would be that they would meet and that they would exchange ideas, they would spend a few days, that they would talk with the grad students, and they would make connection. That would build trust that you need to start to really build a project. So the next step after that would be the French-Canadian Research Fund, so that you meet once, you exchange ideas, you make a seminar, and then you know that you can work with that person, and then you want to apply to the French-Canadian Research Fund. So in 2019, for example, there were 20 Canadian researchers who went to France, and one of them was from Carleton. I don't have his or her name here on my slide. So there are other tools to foster cooperation. I will briefly introduce some of them. So you may know that in France, we have many research institutions besides universities. So I gave a few examples here, like CNRS, INRA, INRIA, and so on. Some of them are very generous, such as CNRS, but some others are more specifically on some topics, like INSERM, on medicine, or IFREMER, on everything about the ocean. There is another, I will briefly talk about European funding. And then briefly talk about the French-Canadian Research Fund, and then Clotilde will go more in depth into the program itself, how it's organized, how it's evaluated, and what do you need to do to apply. I would first talk about CNRS for the short story. I'm a CNRS researcher before I joined the French Embassy. So it's my I would say that it's home where I used to work, so I know it quite well. So the CNRS is the largest research institution in France and also in Europe. I give some numbers here, but I just want to mention that it has a lot of research units which are based in different universities everywhere in France, but it also has some I would say international labs which are shared with other countries, and there are some here in Canada. And what I want to mention is that they have tools to start to have collaborations between a researcher from a CNRS laboratory and a laboratory outside France. From the left to the right here, you have the different types of actions that they have, the international emerging actions, the research networks, the research projects, and from left to right, it's the smallest programs they have first, and at the end, the largest programs that they can build, which are first to meet and to interact once or twice a year for a few years, and at the end, it's really a real lab which has its own researchers. So there is an example in the University of Laval in Quebec. There is one of the main Arctic research lab, which is common to France and Canada, Takuvik. And for the story, this Takuvik laboratory started as a French-Canadian Research Fund project. And then it was very successful and it grew and it received money from both governments and became a very large unit, which is one of the flagship laboratory of CNRS here in Canada. So your main contact for that is Yann Matas, which is the director of the office here in Canada. He's here in Ottawa, in fact. So these are, and all the different organizations I was mentioning on this slide, such as the CNRS, but all the others also have this type of opportunities. So if you are in contact with a researcher from one of these organizations, you can contact them and say, oh, maybe we can build some kind of program together that your institution can provide. I will briefly talk about European funding schemes because we are mostly here to talk about the French-Canadian Research Fund. So H2020 was the previous European funding scheme. Now there is a new one, which is Horizon Europe. These are very large consortia of researchers which have to involve several partners from different countries and also involve some small companies. However, Canadian, even though Canada is not part of the EU, obviously, Canadian teams can take part in these programs. And until this year, at least there was some funding from the New Frontiers in Research Fund. So that the Canadian team could take part in these schemes, but also receive some money from the Canadian government because they could not receive money from the European Union, obviously. These programs, which are up to now, the Canadian government was giving up to $125,000 a year. Up to 4 years, so that these teams could take part in these large consortia. And so there is a contact at the bottom of this slide that you can find also online. The idea is that if you want to collaborate with European teams, you can really take part in these programs. So for Horizon Europe, which is the new funding scheme, there are still negotiations between Canada and Europe and how Canadian teams can take part, but hopefully within the next couple of years, that will be something, that will be another opportunity for you. I will briefly talk about the Canadian, the France Canada pour la Recherche. Just to, tell the story about it, it started to really strengthen the collaboration between France and Canada 20 years ago. And it's built on the cooperation between a consortium of university here in Canada, including Carleton University, and all the universities which are in France. So you, as a researcher from Carleton University, you can collaborate with any researcher in France because the funding from the French side is coming from the Ministry of Higher Education and Research, which means that any researcher from France can build one of these programs with researchers from only the 20 universities from the consortium in Canada. We have two co-presidents, Ruby Heap here in Canada and Jacques Samaru, and to next year from France. And it exists since 20 years. I will not go into the details because Clotilde will talk more about that. If you have your local contract here that was introduced in this session, the university and the national contact is here at the embassy. The last thing I would like to talk about is the French-Canada Innovation Platform, Into Innovation, which we started a few years ago when I arrived 3 years ago, and which was launched last year. So this program is a different type of program. It's also Clotilde, which is managing it with a lot of energy and strength. And the idea of this program is to contact companies with laboratories. So you are not an actor in the beginning of this program. It's more, let's say there is a company who needs a specific expertise in one field to develop a project that they cannot do indoors because they don't have their own research labs. They contact the platform, and the platform is finding the right expert. So it's a matchmaking platform between companies and laboratories. And the idea is that if the company is French, then the laboratory would be in Canada. And if the company is in Canada, then the laboratory has to be in France. So that's it for now. I mean, just a few contacts. We are a few of us here in Ottawa, to myself, with Amélie, the assistant, and our counselor, Charlotte Montel. And we also have a small team in Toronto and Vancouver and Mountain. So, and with that, I will give the floor to Clotilde, who would go more into details of the France-Canada Research Fund. Thank you very much. If you have more questions, we can discuss afterwards once Clotilde is done. Thank you.
Thank you, Xavier. Morning, everyone. So just share my screen here. I think it's working. Okay, so thank you. Well, thank you, Xavier, because you already introduced a lot. So about the program, so my name is Clotilde. I am presently working at the Office of Vice President Research at the University of Ottawa, where I am managing 2 programs, including the France-Canada Research Fund. So we have a tradition at the University of Ottawa, so I would like to just start this presentation by acknowledging that we are gathering today here in Ottawa, either the French Embassy, University of Ottawa, or Carleton University, on the unceded territory of Algonquin and Anishinaabe people. So in my role of the France-Canada Research, usually I start with an overview, but Xavier gave you already a lot of information. So this program exists for more than 20 years. I would just like to mention one more detail for you, eventually future candidates of the program, is that the program is managed simultaneously both by France and Canada. So just you know that we work, the French Embassy in Canada is mainly responsible for everything happening in France, and the Canada part is managing here at the University of Ottawa and the main contact. So the same for the governance. Xavier already explained it to you that it works in the co-presidency. So I will go into details for you to help you to have the best application. So just, you know, it's a funding program. So the FCRF fund every year up to 20 projects with the amounts between $8,000 and $15,000. So this amount cover mainly mobility expenses, and usually in the pre-pandemic era, it was available for 2 years. And I would just take the time here to explain to you that we are very much aware of the situation and the restriction for traveling between France and Canada. And so I'm happy to really tell you that the program is still ongoing, and we can add extension as much as we want. Because when we said 2 years, it's effective 2 years. You will have the time. If we need to have some months and months, don't worry. Even for the previous laureate from 2020 and 21, some of them didn't start the project, but they will still have 2 years to spend the money. So the main objective of the FCRF is to initiate new collaboration. You will see for the eligibility, that is very important. One of the big assets of the program is that it is open to all research fields. And the governance is here very to promote all the science, including STEM, of course, the social, medicine, everything. And at the same time, very interested by interdisciplinary projects. And the second point, very important for you to know, we want to have young researchers involved in the project. It is very important for you. So, like I said, we have a general program. So every year, 20 projects are funded. Since 2018 now, the governance have decided to suggest annual thematic. So this year, they choose to work on this specific thematic, which is the impact of global change on oceans and coastal regions. I just want you to understand that this year, eventually up to 5 projects will be funded on this specific thematic. So first of all, it does not concern the 20 projects, okay? Only 5, eventually 5. It is open again to all research fields. We do not expect to only focusing on oceanography, okay? We're very interested in any study, for example, the impact on the population living on the coastal regions. So please, don't limit yourself, okay? It's just, you know, when you, if you're interested in applying the FCRF and you're interested in this specific thematic, just specify it on the application form. You just have to check. Okay, for the researcher interesting to apply to a program, we have eligibility criteria, and these are mandatory. So the first one is that the project must be led by researchers from the 2 countries. Okay, so 1 in France, eventually even several in Canada, several in France, but we need to have the 2 countries. So the PI must have a tenure or tenure track position. So in another